well into the 19th century, cesarean section had not been done with good outcomes because of the danger to mother and child. So there was a huge controversy about whether cesarean surgery should be performed on women. There were different doctors and scholars who were proponents and opponents of the surgery. For example, a French doctor, Jacques Guillemot, he was opposed to the cesarean because he said the cesareans he witnessed were always fatal. Another doctor, Francois Morisot, from the 16th century, he was an opponent as well, but he had very accurately described a post-mortem cesarean, so that was used as an instruction guide by other surgeons. In the 18th century, there was an École Anti-Caesarean, translated as the Anti-Caesarean School. There was a report addressed to the Society of Medicine in Paris. A doctor named Baudeloc said he wrote a report addressed to the Society of Medicine saying that this operation could save the lives of mother and baby. In 1844, one doctor, known as C. Kaiser of Copenhagen, described cases of maternal mortality related to caesarean section. From 1750 to 1839, he recorded 338 caesarean sections done on women, of whom 38% survived. The cause of death was infection, then hemorrhage. Another doctor, Herben Yin-Zonidis, described the first 95 known cases of caesarean section in the Netherlands up to 1873, where maternal mortality was 68% and perinatal mortality was 32%. That means almost 7 out of 10 women died of those who had cesareans, and the causes of death were the same: infection or sepsis or hemorrhage. Now, why was there such a high rate of maternal mortality when the cesarean section is accepted as an almost universally safe operation today? Now, in Kaiser's time, which was mid-19th century, it was universally accepted by doctors that the uterus should not be sutured closed. And this was a kind of dogma that was not even questioned in the previous 100 years. So for a whole century, they were doing cesarean section on living women and then not sewing the uterus closed. They would just sew the abdomen closed. Furthermore, according to these early operations, the abdominal incision was made at the left or the right side, sometimes obliquely, means along the side, or longitudinally above the navel of the mother. Compare this to cesarean surgery done today, which is done below the navel and in the middle of the belly, known as the subumbilical lower midline incision. Today, it is done horizontally. Back then, they moved gradually. So from cutting above the navel, they started cutting below the navel through the linea alba, which is the darkened line that appears on the mother's belly during pregnancy. Most of these earlier surgeons also made incisions in a longitudinal direction according to the shape of the uterus. Now, the idea behind cutting in these places was to prevent the gaping of the uterine wound because they didn't sew back the uterus. As I said, there were some doctors before that, before the 19th century. So already in the 18th century, there were doctors in France and England who did try to suture the uterus. And in fact, when they decided that this would become a more common or acceptable part of the surgery, the cesarean surgery was revolutionized. One doctor, M. Lebas, in France, and another one, James Barlow, in England, they did their first successful cesarean operations in the late 18th century, and they did include in their medical reports that they sutured the uterus. In the US, one Dr. Warren Brickell, in the mid-19th century, advocated for sewing the uterus closed, but there were still many doctors who opposed this idea. In the mid-19th century, there was a Dutch doctor, Simon Thomas, who attended a woman in Zoetermeer. She was 40 years old. This was her first pregnancy, and she was already in labor for 2 days. A forceps delivery was attempted but failed, and by a classical incision, that means in the middle of the belly, a cesarean section was done on her, and she had a daughter. The uterus, in this case, was closed together with 8 silver wires, and both mother and child survived. In the late 19th century, one German doctor, Max Sanger, he published his experience with a new suturing technique. This publication became an international breakthrough, and after his publication, suturing became widely accepted. Previously, without sutures, according to Sanger's statistics, 50% of women who survived their first cesarean surgery. So already we see there was 7 in 10 that did not survive. So those who survived, and had another pregnancy, they had a rupture of the uterine scar in their next pregnancy. However, after suturing became a norm, the rate of rupture reduced to around 4 to 5%. In the late 19th century as well, we see that here is a doctor from Scotland who went to Uganda and observed the locals performing cesarean surgery on a pregnant woman. She was given palm wine to drink before the surgery, and then after the baby was cut out, they sutured her uterus and her belly. So while in Europe or in the English-speaking world, there were so many debates and controversies about suturing the uterine wound. It's interesting that there is one documented case of a successful cesarean done in Uganda.